So today's a very special 3 marker challenge because these 3 colors were actually chosen by Copic for me to use. I actually had a pretty hard time using these 3 colors together, and let me tell you exactly why that was. So these are Copic's official colors for the month of November 2018. There's R37 or Carmine, E37 Sepia, and G99 Olive. Now, when I was doing my testing to see how I want or what I wanted to draw and what these colors kind of looked like on paper, and I discovered something real quick, and that was all 3 colors have very similar tone. So what that really means is if I were to desaturate or remove all of the saturation from this video, these 3 colors would look almost exactly the same. Now this was kind of scary as an artist, especially for me who kind of avoids dark saturated colors because I'm just not very comfortable with markers yet, and I like to stick to my pastels and slowly build up the color and, you know, have more control in that way. This was not going to be like that, so this was going to be a very much a learning experience and diving right into my biggest fear when it comes to markers. The other thing that made these colors very different from what I would usually gravitate towards is when I put these over a line art, when I did my smudge test, I quite quickly learned that the contrast between these colors and whatever I chose to use as line art was going to be nil. Okay, these colors were almost as dark as the black liner. So basically what I usually do, which is use line art to create all of the details and like the face and the body, was not really going to work in this situation. But I will get to that later when I start adding in color. Right now I want to address what I'm drawing and why I'm drawing what I'm drawing. So I did a lot of thumbnails and like research and tried to figure out what exactly I wanted to draw using these 3 colors before I dove in and like created this final illustration. And no matter how I looked at these colors, they just made me think of the holidays, like the red and the green and then that beautiful brown, like all together. It just, like it just made me think of Christmas and like Thanksgiving and I don't know, just that whole season and like wreaths especially. So I drew a lot of wreaths and I noticed these colors worked really well for that. And another thing I painted was like a wreath on like a wooden texture, and that looked really cool, and it worked and it used all of the colors, and I was really happy with that. But I knew I wanted to draw a character because that's kind of what I'm known for. So I dove in and created a character using these colors, and my biggest sort of inspiration was definitely like a holiday wreath, and I decided to give this character space buns with holiday wreaths that wrapped around the buns, and I'm very happy with the idea. I think it's very funny and cute. I've probably seen this somewhere and that's where it came from, but I'd also, because of the green wreath, then there's the red bow that like hangs off of the wreath, and that was really fun to draw, like the flowy ribbon that was coming off of the bow and then the hair that was looping up on top of that. And then to further use the colors, I decided to give her some dark brown skin, and then her dress was like a bright red. It's kind of a play on like one of those like Santa dresses that you've seen around with that's like a velvety red color, and then they have like that fluffy white fur stuff on it. It's kind of a play on that, but I decided to make it very slim fitting around like the waist and the body, and then really loose on the sleeves. So they're almost like bell sleeves, and then on the end of basically any edge there's bright white, because there's going to be that fur. Now this was kind of a choice because it made me think of the holidays, but also this was a conscious choice because of the colors I had, and I knew I wanted to keep as many of these colors separate from one another as possible so that they'd have more contrast between them, because if I put the colors right next to each other or tried to do too many details with like multiple colors next to each other, the colors just blended together, and if you were to like squint, even without squinting, and you looked at the drawing, the colors all just looked like one color, and that really was not what I was going for. So by using this white fur to separate like the skin tone from the color of the dress, I was able to get some contrast there, and I'm very happy with that decision. I wish there was something more I could have done with the face, because when it comes to the head, that's where all the colors start, you know, I start putting a lot of colors next to each other because there's the hair, and like you can't really put a white line between the hair and the face. That's gonna look kind of weird. And then there's the wreaths that are in her hair. I did decide to do something special about that to separate it from the hair, but The face is definitely where I had like the least amount of contrast, and I had to make a decision, which I make much later on when I start getting to coloring the skin tone, and the decision was, am I going to put line art on this? I decided for coloring the body, no, I wanted to go for a paper cutout kind of thing. I decided to avoid line art as much as possible because the line art, like I showed you earlier, was really not setting apart from the colors. With red, it worked the best, but with the brown and the green, like you could just you really couldn't see the lines at all, so it was pretty much pointless. So the way I decided to do this was just erase a little bit of pencil at a time and then try to fill in solid blocks of color using the Copic markers. Trying to get a solid tone is a little bit difficult for me. Again, I'm a beginner with these Copic markers. I'm trying to learn, so if you have any tips, definitely let me hear them. I am all ears. But I did my best to try and get a solid tone, especially for the dress. But once I had that solid tone, I went in and tried to add maybe some shading where I thought that there would be shading, and I feel like it pulled away a little bit from that like flat paper cutout-y look that I was going for. But yeah, it's a learning experience. The only other part of this illustration that is like majorly red are the bows up in your hair that are connected to the wreaths. And this is where I started putting into play my idea to try and keep colors separate. So what I did was, you'll see I'm coloring each section of the ribbon, but leaving a little bit of white space between them. I carried this idea over to adding the wreaths in her hair by trying to keep the wreaths, you know, that like even section of whiteness away from the bow. I did that on both sides. Now, each element of this illustration had like a specific color that I had appointed to it, like the wreath, the bow, the dress, and the skin, but there was a hair color that I needed to choose, and I didn't have an extra color, so what I decided to do was use two colors, mix them together. I used two very contrasting colors, which are red and green, and by layering those two up, I get a very, very dark, near black, pretty brown color, and I really liked that for the hair color. I think it worked really well. And you'll see, like I mentioned earlier, this is where colors are starting to get very close together and starting to almost touch, and then like some sections are going to end up touching, like the skin and the hair, because like I said, no white line between that would just look really weird. So I had to kind of come up with a way to keep these colors like in their own little sections and like keep them separate so that they don't all blend into just one blob, and that was by using a Posca pen. And what I did was I just outlined basically all of the shapes and gave them like this nice even white line. I tried to do this as much as possible without the Posca pen, like just using the color of the paper, but there were some parts where I either messed up or forgot, so I needed to use the pen and just create that like even white line around the wreaths and the bows. After that, I started coloring in the hands, and that part was really fun to do, the sort of like paper cutout-y section, because I was like able to draw in each finger with like a stroke, and I really enjoyed that part. But you may have noticed, you'd be like, wait a minute, it kind of looks like she's avoiding coloring the face, and confession, yes I was. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm very scared of using line art and these markers together because of like their similar tones, and so I was just very worried about doing the face because that is where the most details are in this particular illustration, and I thought that was going to be the easiest thing to really mess up, so I put it off till last because I was just so nervous. I did end up choosing to put line art on the face just because I was very nervous about like losing that like detail that I had in the face already by adding color on top of it. And then I gave that ample time to dry and added more like Posca pen to the bows and added more separation of color there. And then once I was fully sure that that line art was dry and it wasn't going to smudge, I started adding in the color. I'm pretty sure I was holding my breath for like the entirety of coloring in the face because I really didn't want to get any weird streaks or strokes like in weird places on the face, because I like the face to be very smooth when it comes to coloring, so I was very careful and tried to avoid overlapping any parts that were already dry and tried to like fill in the face with as like quickly as possible so that it was all like still wet and juicy while I was adding in the marker so that none of it was dry. I'm just like repeating myself because like that's how nervous I was. I was just like, no strokes, no streaks. I think I did a pretty good job overall, and then I was able actually to add shading right under her chin by going over like a couple times with that same marker, and that's just my favorite thing about markers is the fact that you can do that. It just looks so cool. I love it. And then I learned from experience by testing these markers together that I really did not like using any of the other markers as like a blush color on this face. I think it just didn't look very good. The colors were just meh, like there wasn't a good enough blush color. So I decided to use this bubblegum Crayola colored pencil that I had on my desk and just sort of scribbled and blended on like the cheeks and the nose to add a little bit more like blush to the face. I also used the E37 color sepia to add some shading to the dress. So like underneath the fur on the top of her dress, I wanted there to be a little bit extra dimension there to make it look a little bit more poofy and like it's sticking out more. So that's what I did there. So after that, I added in some extra details here and there, like with the Posca pen. And a cool thing I learned is I added like some white fern shapes to the wreath with the Posca pen, and then went over that with the Copic marker, and it looks really cool because there's like 2 separate green tones there, even though I only had 1 Copic marker. What? Yeah, that was really cool. I wish I had realized that earlier. I could have maybe incorporated it in other sections of the drawing. But after that, and coloring in the lips, it was time to add in the background color. And if you look at the illustration, there's one color I used the least. What's that one? Oh, it's a green. So I decided to make the background color green. And I've never colored in this large of a section with a alcohol-based marker before, so that was a treat. Trying to get it to not streak was near impossible. I've tried a couple different things. I looked up like try do like swooshy motions. I tried that. Try to do really quick motions. I tried that. Go over the section a couple times. I tried that. All of them sort of worked to an extent, but they weren't able to get rid of like every streak. So I had this idea to do it anyway, but I added some like snowflakes to the background, so like little X's and dots here and there to kind of distract from the streaks and to make it look a little bit more winter themed with snow. So I'm kind of happy with that. I really like the way the drawing looks because there's just like so much color everywhere. It's just like in your face. And whenever I draw something, I tend to just draw a random character in the middle of the page. So I'm very proud of myself for deciding to attempt a solid background color, even if it's not like a detailed background of any kind. Like the fact that I'm taking steps to move in the right direction to start adding backgrounds to my drawings. So I'm happy about that, and I hope to get a little bit better with strokes and lines in my markers. So this is only my second ever illustration with a Copic marker, so I'm pretty proud of it. I've used alcohol-based markers, but this is my second Copic one, and yeah, I'm happy with it. I had a lot of fun like designing the character, so let me show you some of like the sketches I did when I was planning out the character. So these are some of the ones I did before I drew this picture. I'm really happy with some of these, and you can see where I was testing out the colors, and you'll actually notice in my ELO sketchbook the paper's different than what I used to draw the final illustration. The ELO sketchbook, the colors are actually a lot lighter, so I was a little bit more comfortable using them. But when it came to the marker paper that I used for the full illustration, colors actually ended up being a little bit darker, so it was even scarier because I was like, whoa, wait a minute. This isn't what I was planning on. So this whole thing was definitely like kind of delving into my like biggest marker fears, and I think it turned out all right. I'm actually really happy with it, and I think it's given me quite a bit of confidence to, you know, use markers more and use some of those more saturated colors and like that I'm scared of. So yeah, I can leave the pastels behind for a little bit, and yeah, it turns out okay. It's not that scary. I hope to get better in the future, but so this is a cool bench point that I can compare myself to in the future, and I think that'll be really cool. Anyway, if you want, I want to thank Copic for choosing me to be their November artist and to challenge me to use these 3 colors in an illustration. It was very much a learning experience, and I had a lot of fun, so thank you for that. And yeah, you guys actually can see this illustration over on their Instagram page, and I'll also be posting it on my Instagram page, so I'll have links to all that in the description. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed watching my process of using these 3 very similarly toned markers in one complete illustration. Yeah, I had a lot of fun. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys all next week, and I hope you have a delicious evening full of waffles. Bye!